Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show will revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Moosie Drier and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen, along with Moosie Drier, and today we are thrilled to welcome the authors of the great new book, 50 Years of Happy Days, Brian Levant and Fred Fox Jr. Brian and Fred, thanks so much for joining us today.
Boy, thanks for having us.
Great pleasure.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I want to start with Brian. You've been here before, and we touched upon you being a showrunner for Happy Days then. So you both worked on the series. How long had you discussed writing the book, and what made you finally decide to get together for the project? Because I read the book, and it's fantastic. I really loved it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you know that this year, 2024, is the 50th anniversary. The show debuted January 15th, 1974, and it was our sincere hope that on that date, this book will be in stores. Missed by that much. It comes out actually November 5th, so you can vote and go to your local bookstore and get 50 Years of Happy Days. And from publisher G Editions, and it was a long road. We started this, I think, Fred, probably like over 2 years ago, right?
Yes, definitely.
We first we kicked around the idea of doing it and what kind of book it should be and could be. And we did a proposal. Now, most proposals that you'll see for books are 8-9 pages, sometimes 20. Ours was 116.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
There's a lot of photos.
There was so much that we wanted to say about the show and its history and the people who made it. It was, for both of us, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, Fred, the first script you ever wrote was for Happy Days, correct?
Actually, it was a Laverne and Shirley, but
okay, so you started in the family
universe.
We can talk about Fred started there, but I sold stories to series, but they were reluctant to let a 22-year-old go to script. Happy Days did, and I was there on and off for the next 8 years. And my first day on the set, I was greeted by Fred, who was so happy to meet me and had heard nice things from Bob Brunner and Arthur Silver, and we have been closely associated since that time. But we hadn't actually written together since 1989, and so it was so much fun for us to do that and to work on something that we loved so much and spend so much time thinking about and talking to the people we love so much. And the entire surviving cast and producers have been so cooperative. I can't tell you how many of the photographs in the book came from them, and they gave such frank and wonderful and long interviews that we had to draw from. And it was a big undertaking, and for a while it looked like Paramount did not want to cooperate, which would have been a death knell as far as publishers were concerned. But finally we won them over and got access to their incredibly small photo libraries. The vast majority of the hundreds and hundreds of photos in this book did not come from the studio and their archives. They came from everybody on the show, and particularly from the collection of the show's primary director, Jerry Paris, who you remember from the Dick Van Dyke Show and was an associate of Garry Marshall's, and that's how they came to work together on The Odd Couple and Gary and Belson's first couple movies and Happy Days. And he had his daughter, Julie, was so wonderful to give us these 8 leather-bound, 5-6 inch books filled with 8x10s of the most memorable shots from each season.
Yeah, which helped incredibly.
Well, I want to say, because I like I said, I read the book and it was just so enjoyable. It was just so much fun to reminisce with everything. So many pictures that I'd never seen before, so many toys that I never even knew existed. So you break it down season by season. But for those who don't know, can you tell us a little bit how Happy Days came into being? Because in a convoluted way, it was kind of a spin-off itself.
Well, okay, so it all began with a conversation between Michael Eisner, who was then the president of primetime programming at ABC and would later be the CEO of Disney and Paramount, among other places, and Tom Miller, who was a television development executive at Paramount and actually began his career as a dialogue coach for Billy Wilder. And they talked about the kind of shows that weren't on TV anymore. And they Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, Mama. They had a soft spot. Mama was like 19. These guys are older than us, so it's like 48 to 51, and it was based on George Stevens' film I Remember Mama, and it was about a Norwegian family adjusting to the new life in America, and so that's what they took to Garry Marshall, who was the best soft guy on the lot. I say soft guy, his partner, Jerry Belson, always preferred a much harder hitting comedy. But Garry was capable of doing very warm and loved to do that. And so, as Garry said in one of his autobiographies, they wanted to do stories about guys named Lars and Nels. I didn't know how to write for Lars and Nels. And so he changed the concept just to a middle-class family living in the Midwest in the middle of the 20th century and centering it on the relationship between a high school sophomore and his father and his family and his friends. And they made a beautiful, very sweet pilot starring Ron Howard, starring Anson Williams, starring Marion Ross. How could I forget that? And with other people playing, Harold Gould played Howard Cunningham, who would go on to play Rhoda's father for 4 years, and other actors as brother Chuck. We all remember Chuck, who vanquished to rerun Heaven sometime at the beginning of the third season.
Yeah, all three of them. And
Joni. And it was a very nice pilot, but it didn't sell. They played it off on the very last episode of Love American Style.
Love American Style, that's me and you. And on a star-spangled night, my love come to me. You can rest your head on my shoulder, while by the dawn's early light,
and it sat in the vault until Ron Howard starred in 1973. He before he went to USC to start film school, he did American Graffiti. That's how he spent his summer, tailing George Lucas, learning more about USC Film School. And when the film became what is today a $1 billion entity and a double platinum album, the networks all wanted to try and find that formula. And Garry Marshall called it, "You made this show with the same kid who's in the movie." And thus a second Happy Days pilot was ordered. It was written. Garry Marshall still had The Odd Couple on the air. Again, his partner, Jerry Belson, declined to work on Happy Days, thinking it was too soft a subject for him. And so Garry wrote it with Rob Reiner, who was then his brother-in-law, and Phil Mishkin, his writing partner. And the pair had already put a series on the air, The Super, on CBS. And at the time, Rob was also starring on the #1 show in television, All in the Family. And that pilot went into production, I believe, right after Thanksgiving of 1973. And by the middle of January, they were on the air, and their first season we learned so much. Fred and I joined the show in the 4th season. He on staff, me writing for the first time, and then the following year, I joined the staff. So we knew nothing about the very early, other than what we saw on TV and the stories that would come out once in a while. at the table, in the writer's room. So going back and reconstructing things like the casting process.
Also, Brian, remember Ron Howard had to read several times for the part he already had.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
they thought that Ron and Anson were much too old at this point, but they won over tremendous competition. A lot of names you would recognize, and the great thing was that this was such an important moment in all of the cast lives that they remembered their auditions, being hired, their first days on the set with such clarity. Other thing is I don't remember. Fred and I didn't remember episodes that we produced. Serious. I wish I could say that wasn't true. But through these vivid recollections, we really did piece together the casting process and the first couple seasons, which were tumultuous and fun for them, but it was before it became a dynasty, before Happy Days became appointment television. And the first season was very successful, a very nice launch, and then the next year they ran headlong into JJ Jimmy Walker on Good Times, Dynamite, and the shows exchanged places on the ratings. All of a sudden, Happy Days is hovering at 50th, and Good Times is like number 11. And to turn that around, they refashioned the entire show, going from a single camera and a more moody, realistic show to a 3-camera show filmed in front of a live audience. And they put Henry Winkler's character, the Fonz, who was growing in popularity. It was obvious from the first time he was on screen that he was unique and important and going to be valuable to the series. But no one ever suspected that he would become the central focus of the show through his relationship with Richie and the Cunninghams.
In the first episode, he didn't speak until the show was almost over. Right?
Yeah, like page 25, he had 4 lines.
I remember he didn't have his leather jacket at that time. Anything has a different look, single camera film as opposed to the on the stage. Yeah. But saying that was part of the intrigue. It's like, you don't see the shark until way into the film of Jaws. You don't hear Henry Winkler say a peep.
It was very savvy. And Ron Howard said, that you could feel the character in the reading. And he said, I'm not just saying that after the fact. Mm-hmm. He had a palpable presence. He was cast. Tom Miller, who, by the way, the show is in Milwaukee because that's where Tom Miller was from. And Milwaukee has embraced the show believe me, nobody's embraced the show like Milwaukee's embraced Happy. It's really weird. You can go to Boulder. Mork and Mindy was set here, huh?
Yeah.
Are the Golden Miami? Does Miami carry? Are there Golden Girl statues in Miami? No, no. But there's one of Henry, right by the river there. Anyways, so turning the show into a 3-camera live audience show changed the dynamic so much. It unleashed something in these people. If you watch that 3rd season, the energy is just phenomenal. It crackles. They were literally on fire. Everything that came out of their mouth scored. They had such confidence in themselves, in the material. And under Jerry Paris and Garry Marshall's guiding hands, and Lowell Gans, along with his then partner Mark Rothman, came on to do the show that changed it from a single camera to a 3-camera. What's it called? Fonzie's Getting Married or something like it. There was 90 titles. Somebody's getting married. There were probably 11 wedding shows on Happy Hour, 255 episodes. There's more weddings. Arnold got married. Joni and Chachi got married.
Brian got married.
But never the Fonz. Richie got married. Off screen, of course. But it was it was a tsunami, and the American public was swept up in it like nothing that had happened in TV. I mean, the last time I remember a character becoming kind of bigger than the show was 77 Sunset Strip with Kooky. Ed Burns, right? Kooky, lend me your comb. They made records and stuff, but that was nothing compared to Fonzie. Man, Henry and other members of the cast were on the cover of virtually every national magazine. There were all of a sudden thousands of licensed products, from shampoo to Halloween costumes and figures and motorcycles and clothing. And so much of that is represented in the book. So there's a guy in Cordango, Italy, Giuseppe Ganelli. He's a radiologist, and he has been certified by Guinness as having the most number of Happy Days objects in his collection. And he has a museum in Cordango, Italy.
I think there's 15,000 items.
Wow.
Including, I mean, we worked on the show. He's got stuff we don't have. And wardrobe. He's got Fonzie's I wrote the first Falcons episode. I don't have a Falcons jacket. He's got the Falcons. He's got Anson Williams' Jefferson High jacket. He's got Fonzie's coveralls from the garage. He's got the pinball machine from Arnold. He's got virtually every toy. Thousands of autographs from the same people. I don't know why you get so many, but we dispatched a major interior photographer from Milan to Cordango to shoot all his stuff. And that's all heavily represented in the book. So you can see that it wasn't just a TV show. It was a phenomenon. And as Fred's old friend Lee Margulies, who was a TV editor of the LA Times, did a blurb for us. And he talked about how we no longer are programming things. He said it was desirable if you could get a show that mom and dad and brother and sister and grandpa could all sit around the TV and watch. And that's been lost.
You brought up Good Times, and I'll bring up, because I think there was a 1-2 punch in programming with Welcome Back, Kotter and you guys. And those shows were fine and all, but like Dynamite and all that, to me, and I know I'll offend somebody, but like, okay, but gimmicky and shticky and all that. Your show had like scripts. Your show had a family that I cared about. Your show had something to follow, as opposed to here comes that, what you talking about, or like.
I will say this on both sides, that we had Sit on It, Fabamundo, that we had things that were repeated far too often at the expense of quality writing at times. However, I always felt that although you have to remember that Good Times did carry an economic punch. They were poor people, and you felt that, and that was unusual on TV. And despite J.J. Walker's ubulance, Florida didn't know how to pay the rent. You had Johnny
right.
coming in and waving an overdue notice. Kotter, I never really connected with on the same way that I did with many other shows. I agree with that, but you can't argue with the fact that they were very successful and had they had a lunchbox too.
Oh no, absolutely no. I liked Welcome Back, Kotter. I'm just saying and yes, you guys had Sit on It and and all that stuff, but you guys also, you just had that one extra. You had more substance. You had the wholesome family. You had scripts that I'd be following. I can't tell you a storyline from Welcome Back, Kotter or Good Times. I could tell you a moment or two or a scene or two, but I can't tell you, that's the episode where, and then I'll tell you the arc. But Happy Days, many, there's something behind it,
I think a lot of it lies in the fact that it was really made by people who genuinely loved each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very much on display there, and that's not, I'm not saying everybody loved everybody every second, and there wasn't, people who'd get mad and my part isn't good this week. But overall, this was the happiest ship in the Navy.
Right.
And also that extended with our softball team. playing in many.
We're going to ask about that too. Yeah.
In the USO, and just so many times you say, "Oh, it was a family show," but it was really true, as Brian's been saying.
Yeah,
we really cared.
Sure. What was your experience with Garry Marshall? Was he just as fantastic as he appears to be?
Yes.
Well, Brian, can I start with that?
Please, Fred, go
on. Worked on the Joey Bishop show when Garry Marshall was there, and Terry, and it was one of their first things. And Garry spoke at my father's memorial and just said that he was so supportive, and they learned a lot from Dad and stuff. So Garry was just, as Brian will say, just an incredible mentor. He cared so much for the people that worked for him, and as you saw in the book, he started so many careers that people went on to do incredible work.
Yeah, no, he had an eye for talent, for performers, and for finding. He was told, actually, at Fred's father's memorial, he told the story how Fred's father, who spent his career writing for Lucy and George Burns, and was an Academy Award nominee in his 70s for Dear God.
Yeah. Right?
Yes. But he told Garry Marshall, don't just do one thing, be many things. And Garry Marshall was a writer and a producer and a director and an actor and a musician and a ball player.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people he recruited was not for their talent with a pen. It was often their talent with a racket or a bat. But he wanted people who were well-rounded. He wanted to bring different kinds of people together. And, when I first started at Happy Days, it was Fred and I were the youngsters. There were more veteran people there, people who had been in the industry for a long time or had worked with Garry for, 7, 8, 9 years. And as we went along, and his shows, the number of shows at one time, remember, Garry Marshall was the executive producer of 4 of the 5 top shows in television. And so that required, finding not just 5 or 6 people for a staff. That requires, finding 60,
Yeah.
And he reached out to a lot of improv groups. That's where like Mark Sotkin, Chris Thompson, Judy Pioli, who ran Laverne and Shirley, and later the Golden Girls came from, and people like me who we met on the basketball court. I've told this story a million. I'll tell it as fast as I can. But Garry had a Saturday morning at his game at his house for decades. Elliot Gould and James Conn were there. Another time, Mitch Kupchak and his wife from the Lakers are playing. You got electricians, agents, stockbrokers, trading. It was not a nice game. It was a rough game.
Yeah.
And so my first time there, I of course I want to make an impression, right? So I'll guard Garry, not realizing he was like 6 inches taller than me, and I think he played at Northwestern. And I was a high school scrub. But I really did guard him. I blocked a couple of his shots, and after the first game, he waddles. He always had bad knees. He waddles up there. So what do you do? And I said I was already in the Writers Guild and sold a couple stories, and was really looking to make a career of it. And he nods and he goes, "Call Diane in my office on Monday, and you'll get a meeting." And I had a meeting, and I sold them the first story I pitched
to Bob Brunner.
And there was the start of an incredible relationship.
And Brian, that really could have gone both ways, because you're not supposed to beat your boss in golf. I know he wasn't your boss yet, but you know what I mean? That kind of old adage.
Definitely.
But he's probably Garry Marshall was a real human. He's like, this guy's got whatever, what do you do?
Well, I had youth on my side. I was 22 at the time.
You didn't know yet to be,
I was very aggressive. Fred, I thinking back to myself in my early days on staff, I was I was so wild and like uncivilized. Seriously, I don't know how they didn't throw me out. Honest to God, I was just all over the place and wild.
No,
and
not
so energized.
Let me tell the story. I'm on the Happy Days stage, and Bob Brunner, who was producing at the time, came down and said, "Wow, this young kid came in, pitched 14 stories. We could have used them all. It was amazing. Brian just wowed them, and they just went on to do incredibly well."
Well, very, very lucky that, you know, I tried to break in with MASH. I tried to break in with Bob Newhart. They weren't interested. Garry Marshall thought a 22-year-old kid from the Midwest might be able to add to the show about a Midwestern family, you know?
Yeah.
One thing, according to your book, though, I just want to ask, because it sounded like in your book that Garry Marshall did not have that much faith. He stayed on Odd Couple because he didn't have so much faith in the Happy Days.
I believe that's true. You know, everybody said he wasn't around much at the beginning. But you have to understand that the Odd Couple was terribly demanding of you know, it was like the Bataan Death March. You know, yeah, every day, you know, people would just drop. There was so much. I guess the guys were terribly competitive, and
Jack.
yeah, Klugman and Randall were competitive, and it was a tough show, and it aged people.
Yeah.
You know, as Laverne and Shirley was. But, you know, sometimes that combustion is what drives the engine.
Yeah, because it was still a good show. The Odd Couple with those two guys, you know, it was a good show. I thought, you know, Pamela and Ferdin, and sure the list goes on, but
Al Molinaro, no, Johnny Rappaport, who ended up executive producer of MASH, worked on there. Jerry Belson, Harvey Miller, who co-wrote Private Benjamin, Rothman and Gans started there. You know, they had some horses, but they would, you know, it was always looking for fresh horses. I guess it was taxing. Now, you know, I never worked on Laverne and Shirley. I was terrified. On what was it? Friday nights, I think, whatever night Laverne and Shirley had a table and Penny would sit at the table and the doors would be open to their conference room. I was so scared of them, I wouldn't walk past to go to the bathroom. I'd go all the way around the other way.
That's funny.
Fred, you know, you tell him, Fred, you know, goes way back with Cindy.
Yeah, New Year's Eve, 1975, I got a call from Cindy Williams, and I went to high school together with Sally Field, Mike Ovitz, Robert Fink. Anyway, so Cindy calls and said, "Fred, I'm going to be doing this show called Laverne and Shirley. Would you be interested in being my assistant? And then when I leave for the day, you can go to the writer's room." So I thought, my God, yes. So she got me a meeting with Garry Marshall. I walk in the door, and first thing Garry says, "So you're Freddie Fox's son?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he goes, "And I know you want to write." And I almost went, huh? Because growing up, I thought it was so cool. Dad was a writer for some frightening reason. No, didn't even enter my mind I would do this. So,
thank God Kobe Bryant didn't feel that way.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So Garry says, you know, if Cindy needs her dry cleaning picked up, you know, please do that. I just want her to be comfortable so she can concentrate on the show. So, you know, after she left for the day, I would go to the writer's room, which was just talk about on the job training. It would have like the new guy or girl writer, when we're going over the script, if you had a joke, instead of just pitching it out, you had to like write it down, and then you give it to a real writer and they would pitch it. If it bombed, they would never say, "Hey, the stupid guy just pitched that." But if it got a big laugh, they'd say, "Oh, that was Fred's." So that was a fantastic.
That's a safe place. That sounds like a safe place to
pitch your horror stories where someone will pitch a joke and they go, "That's stupid. That's not fun." You know, so that would have been devastating.
Well, but you see, that was the thing. They had rules. You didn't say somebody's joke was shit. You'd
Right.
say, I think it's shit. So it may not be, but it's your opinion, right? But it's a way of being nice at the same time. There are manners, writer's room table manners mattered to Garry, not hurting people's feeling, elevating people, keeping them engaged.
So if I could just finish this one.
Like a great baseball manager, the way he handled his teams.
Right. So anyway, if I can finish, we're doing an episode where Ron Howard and Anson Williams are going to guest star. And someone said, well, who's going to write the episode? Lowell Ganz said, well, we have someone in mind. And then they asked me to write it. And the day I got the assignment, my parents were going on a 2-week vacation. And I had to have it done in 2 weeks. And I thought, if Dad were here, I'd go, what in the hell am I doing? But fortunately, it worked out. And then Garry was very nice and asked me to come to Happy Days. So I've had extreme luck in that area.
You just mentioned Laverne and Shirley, though. You met in the book, too. It sounded like Cindy Williams did not want to do the show at all, though. And you were friends with her, right?
Originally, yes. Right. She had to be talked into it pretty much.
Well, number one, we cover all the spinoffs.
Yes.
From Happy Days, which there is a multitude, and even ones that they're spinoffs, but they're really not spinoffs. But from what we gathered, talking to Lowell and Ganz and other sources, was that they did this Happy Days episode, 3rd season, A Date with Fonzie, where Richie is set up by Fonzie with the sure thing, who is Shirley, and they double date with Laverne and Shirley. And as soon as they get home, back to Richie's house, that they said was his house, not his parents', Fonzie takes Laverne upstairs and leaves Richie alone. And it is one of the most hilarious bad seduction scenes you have ever seen. And it ended hilariously. And the show was such a smashing success that they ordered a presentation. That 2 weeks later, Lowell Ganz and Mark Rothman wrote a scene that was shot in the Cunningham's kitchen, and was set to follow the date and talk about the differences between the two women, being a realist and a dreamer, and that is basically the same scene that was enhanced and enlarged that was then the final scene of the first Laverne and Shirley pilot. And which really, it was an amazing piece of work because it set the characters so firmly that now you know who they are. Now you just throw them anywhere and you know how they're going to react. So the strength of the characters and how that was built was very impressive. But 114 days after A Date with Fonzie aired, Laverne and Shirley premiered. And Laverne and Shirley was an immediate hit. It was the highest rated premiere in ABC's history.
Yeah.
And they finished, where did they finish, Fred? I think they were definitely in the top 3. I don't think they were number 1.
Yeah, I think number 2, but incredible success.
Well, those two just, they had incredible chemistry for one thing. Whether or not, they got along in real life or not, that's a whole nother thing. But like on screen, they had great chemistry, great physical comedy. They were the next generation Lucy and Ethel. And it's a branch from Happy Days, which is obviously a huge hit in television history. What was the atmosphere like though on Laverne and Shirley's set though? Like, do we know? Like, it was a contrast to Happy Days, wasn't it?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
It's funny when I started on Laverne and Shirley, I think 4 days before the episode was on. So incredible ratings, as Brian said, just skyrocket. So I go into work and I'm thinking, wow, this is incredible. Everyone's going to be so happy. And they were, but the set was very interesting, shall we say. Bobby Hoffman, who was a dialogue coach,
casting director,
left to do Freaky Friday, Julie Foster. So he recommended to Garry that I be the dialogue coach. So I ended up being the dialogue coach, and that was very interesting. Trying to get the cast to go over lines was not the easiest.
They you know, we were censored quite a bit by Paramount, particularly about drug use. And there were drugs on Laverne and Shirley. Phil Foster, posthumously, who played Laverne's father, it was revealed that he was a big distributor for the East Coast mob of coke.
Stop. Really?
So he's kind of a hyphenate.
Yeah. An actor mule. I don't know.
Oh my goodness. I did not know that.
You know, and they didn't let us. Robin Williams, you know, we know there were drugs in his life. We know he was successful in getting off of them and everything. But there was a time, and I spent 2 seasons on Mork and Mindy. And every time he'd sneeze, he'd go, "Oh, there goes $100."
Yeah.
They wouldn't let us say that.
Yeah. I think I heard that before. Yeah. So can I, real quick, going back to Happy Days for a second, and in a nutshell, I'm sure the answer is going to be like Rashomon. I have a feeling everyone's got their own take on it. But so I was watching Dateline last night, and they still haven't found Chuck, the older brother, Chuck Cunningham. So Fred, well, what happened? And I don't, gosh, I'd hate to offend whoever the actor was. Like, you know, they just didn't like him or something.
That's just it. There were 3
of them.
No kidding.
Gavin
I don't remember.
Hurley was on the first season of Happy Days. Rick Carrot did the pilot, and Randall Roberts, I think, was the second season. Chuck, who appeared only in 2 episodes. What happened was, guys, Fonzie became his older brother, so they didn't need an older brother who didn't live in the house and wasn't connected to the storyline. And he was a different character anyway. He was a basketball player.
I remember that.
He was in his own world. But, you know, Ron did a very nice thing for Gavin O'Hurley. He gave him a great part in Willow years later.
Oh, okay.
The film he made for George Lucas.
Yeah. Val Kilmer.
Yes. Which, you know, which I remember at the time, Ron saying that how much he'd learned making that movie, how it advanced him as a filmmaker. And you know, he also taught a lot about, remember that much of his early success as a director of features was as a big comedy director with Splash and Night Shift and all. But really that learning process, he really credits to Happy Days, learning what he called the anatomy of a joke, and how to build scenes and execute like that. And so, you know, that certainly what didn't come into play when he's making the Dan Brown films with technique. I mean, the most incredible contemporary technique you've ever seen. But in terms of delivering the laughs, this was his clinic. You know, Andy Griffith, you know, and by the way, Ron is very honest that a lot of the time he wasn't comfortable with what Happy Days became. That he said, you know, on Andy Griffith, you know, I understood where, you know, that everything was pretty real, and Don Knotts got his laughs from being from you know, being goofy, and on Happy Days, Henry got his laughs from being cool, and then everything changed when they went to the audience format. And he said sometimes he didn't get it, sometimes he didn't appreciate it, but he loved getting the laughs. Yeah, that was the saving grace of that experience.
Let me ask, on the note of changing, I don't, you know, Brian, you came in later. I don't know, Fred, when you first started, but during the 70s, there was no bigger TV star than Henry Winkler. And I suggest that very few TV characters have achieved that level of popularity since. So what's that like to be associated with the show when it just exploded that time? What was that like at that time for the show itself?
It was, well, just one story. We're playing at Dodger Stadium, and I'm warming up at, I don't know, shortstop, and I see this attractive young lady, and she's motioning to me to go see her. And I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. So I walk up to her, and she goes, "Hi, can you get me Henry's autograph?" I mean, it was just, the first time we had our softball team in the earlier part, the fans just watching the game, and Henry was constantly.
He was mobbed everywhere he went. You're right. It was huge, and there wasn't a TV star of that magnitude. And once again, it had such broad appeal that, you know, the 6-year-olds were wearing the Fonzie shirts, and women were kind of swooning over him wherever he went. And you know, in his biography, he doesn't talk about it that much. You know, of you know, the forces that unleashed in his personal life, but on Happy Days, you know, everybody was he was not treated differently by anyone on the show. Right. When it came to the network and the studio, they did treat him differently, and that did create issues. We go into great detail into what season is that? The fourth? I think it was the fourth.
Yeah, you mentioned it was almost changed to Fonzie's Happy Day. So did that affect animosity with the rest of the cast to him at all?
No. You know, Henry and Ron told us the story of that they'd never talked about it until during the shooting of Fonzie Loves Pinky on location, that Ron gave Henry a ride home in his first car, a Volkswagen Bug, which he still owns, and Henry said, you know, the Fonz is taking over. We've never talked about this. How do you feel? And Ron, you didn't do anything. You were just good, but it bothered me, and they really never talked about it again. That was really the extent of it. But Happy Days was an ensemble. They saw themselves as an ensemble. And when ABC gave everybody for Christmas Gucci wallets, except Henry, who got a 3/4-inch videotape deck, that's where the problem started. And Ron called up ABC and ripped him a new asshole and sent his wallet back. And he thought everybody else would, but they didn't.
But Brian, just to add to that, one time at a run through on Wednesday, there's some ABC executives there, and they were just all around Ron and talking to him, and all of a sudden Henry walked by. They all rushed to Henry and just left Ron standing there. So that was
but you know, from afar, my take always about that was Ron Howard was already a veteran going into Happy Days. Like, I know he probably reacted, the Gucci watch, the gift, the car to Henry Winkler, all that. But like, for the most part, I'm assuming that Ron Howard is and was smart enough to know, like, hey, without, you know, maybe this show wouldn't have gone as far or has been as successful without Henry Winkler's character. So you kind of got to go, you know, hey, best idea wins, and let's go along with it.
Well, Ron also said, you know, the show was only growing in popularity because of Henry, and it was a great gig, and he was enjoying it. However, it was always, and I mean always, delaying his goal, which was to be a film director. And remember, after the 7th season, he turned down a new contract and signed a 4-year deal with NBC to where he did some wonderful TV movies that led to his feature career.
I remember his story about he had to be in Eat My Dust in order to direct Eat My Dust. And that got
Grand Theft Auto is the one he directed. Yeah, he was in Eat My Dust to direct.
Oh, but he directed, okay, something like that.
Yes, which he wrote with his dad.
Rants. Yeah.
Yes. You ever work with Rance or Gene?
Many times. Like I feel like every Western I did, there was Rance Howard.
Well, Rance was great for a Western. Sweet man too. Wonderful man, and a wonderful actor who never got the parts he kind of deserved.
No, he was a journeyman who was in so many things.
He never turned down a job. That was their ethos. That was the family ethos, you know? So it was, you did not turn down work.
No,
that was ingrained in Ron since he was a very small child. But you probably got it at the same time. I remember the day Ron opened the letter. He was 24. And I don't even think he was 25 yet. But he qualified for his 20-year SAG pension.
Time to retire, Ron. Yeah.
Can I ask you about Ron Howard? Because by the time the show started, I was looking last night, he had over 50 credits by the time he was like.
But that also includes 8 years on one show. Where and in the first few years, they were still making $39 a year. Remember, he wasn't in every episode, but most.
No, but this is guest starring in different things.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Even
the time before Happy Days, I remember he showed up on MASH. I saw him. I remember some other westerns. A Twilight Zone. He did a Twilight Zone. Ron and Clint did a book together, The Boys, that talked about their parents' love affair and their diverging careers as young actors. It's a wonderful book, and it did very well. And we didn't crib too much from it. But
So, okay, here we go. Let's ask this here. How many episodes, or seasons rather, of Happy Days were shot after the shark jumping episode?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, because it's almost not a fair.
Oh no, it is. It is. Fred, do you know that number?
Go ahead, Fred.
I think 154 episodes or 60, because that was
161, I believe, is the answer.
Right. And
that was only like episode 91.
Yeah, yeah.
155.
Yeah. And either unfortunately or I wrote that episode, and Lee Margulies was at the LA Times, as Brian said, and asked me to write an article. I think it was like 2002, kind of in defense of the Jump the Shark.
Right.
I thought, because when it first came out, I thought I should wear a scarlet F on my chest, like, but
it's a badge of honor.
So this was one of my first weeks on the series on staff. And I grew up, and my mother always, we were very big TV watchers, as you might have guessed, in our home. And my mother always said, you always know when a show's had it when they go to California. And so like week 3 on the show, we're going to California.
Or Hawaii. Yeah.
And I actually said to Bob Brunner, is this the best thing for us? And he goes, it's what Garry wants. But here we are 40 years later, 45 years later, and it's still fresh in everybody's mind. And I don't know why. And there was so much else going on in that show. And
oh yeah,
it gets so overshadowed. But nevertheless, you can't argue with it's become so memorable. And Fred has absorbed the slings and arrows and the pats on the back for this.
Yeah. Well, I think it probably what happened, in my opinion, is that the whole episode, the 2-parter, I believe it was, and the whole going to single camera location from a 3 or 4 camera stage, it was a different look, and it was a departure. It wasn't gimmicky. It was a departure from the regular Happy Days, and people probably thought, oh, they must be reaching or trying for something to hang on for dear life. Let's bring in Robbie Wrist somehow. But and by the way, that's not fair. Robbie's a good guy, good friend, and he didn't kill the Brady Bunch. I will die believing that.
No, Sherwood Schwartz did.
but people, Sherwood Schwartz and maybe Robert Reed. I don't know. But it wasn't like, it was just a departure. Like, shows had the right to go, boy, we've done so many episodes, let's change it up and let's do this over here in California. Great. But the point is, I mean, it couldn't have really jumped the shark. It just became a phrase because of all the episodes and seasons that happened after that episode. That's not the,
I think we did some of our best shows after that.
Afterwards, sure.
Yes. But it's interesting. We really did take a hard look at it. And basically, this was the start of the 5th season. Happy Days was the #1 show during season 4, the 77, 78 season. And Is that right? Yes, I believe so.
I think 76.
And so
77.
basically, there's nowhere to go but down. Now, the boys were Henry was 33, 32, 33 years old. Ron and Donnie and Anson were well into their 20s. They were not boys anymore. They had the characters had started college.
Right.
Erin wasn't a little girl. So the show was maturing. And we say, did it jump the shark? Not really, no. So much of the finest shows that they did came afterwards. And the show, was it as hysterically energetic and funny as it was in the third season, the fourth season? Maybe not. However, the characters had grown and were so much more capable of commanding an emotional punch with the audience. And people were so dialed into the characters that yes, maybe we saw the show's first gray hairs there, but certainly it was not the beginning of the end.
And that's okay. Nothing's wrong. How are you gonna, you're not gonna have season 2 you're not gonna have this, or season 3 rather.
Well, unless you're friends.
Yeah, I guess they were
friends. I mean, there are shows on Happy Days that we can point to, and we're not afraid to call balls and strikes in the book. We really aren't. But I had never seen a show that sustained the quality week to week that Friends did. That was amazing.
I think MTM put out a lot of good.
Right. Oh, absolutely, But there were certainly variants within that. Friends was
right.
just.
So I remember watching an interview or reading something about Henry Winkler. The famous, he goes to do his hair and he's like, white touch perfection or whatever kind of gesture. Right.
Yes.
And I think he came up with that on his own. This
was recounted to us by Don Most. He hung around on, this is the second pilot that aired in January of 74. And he hung around and he watched a fight, an argument between Henry Winkler and the director. And it was, Fonzie was supposed to comb his hair. And Henry said, I'm not going to do that. Every character like this has done that. I'm not going to do that. And we got a scene to shoot. What are we going to do? And he says, I don't know. Let me see. And yes, he took out the comb. He looked at himself in the mirror and, hey, why mess with perfection? And was repeated in the main title for
every time. And that's what I was leading to. So that tells me an actor knows his character. Like, he knows what he would do in that situation. And as writers, that's got to be a great perfect storm. Now these characters, they know these characters. And if you could just be in agreement on that character, much easier to write for, or?
Fonzie was very easy to write for because the character was so well defined.
Yeah.
Half the episodes really dealt with what Fonzie wouldn't do to lose his cool or to show vulnerability. That's when episodes are based on character traits, you're in good shape.
That's a blessing. Yeah.
You don't have to go to Hollywood.
Nothing wrong with that.
I want to talk about an absolute star. I want to talk about Robin Williams in Mork. So the role was originally was supposed to go to John Byner, which, as great as he is, I can't even imagine that. So how did that whole thing come about with Robin Williams getting on?
Wow.
We didn't know the whole story ourselves. All we know was that an actor had been cast. Nobody wanted to do this show. Scotty Marshall, 8 years old in the summer of Star Wars, says his dad, put a spaceman on Happy Days. And Gary wants to make his kids happy, so let's put a spaceman on Happy Days.
And then he leaves the room and says, come up with the story, because his son didn't watch Happy Days. And Gary said, well, what is Brian said, well, gosh, it'd be so cool if it was like an alien or something. So he came up with
Joe Glauberg wrote the show, but as Fred remembered him saying, I'll do it, but it'll be painful. And he ends up getting probably, when Ron Howard talked about, shows that didn't quite jive with reality. And there's the guy from Ork. And so an actor was cast. He quit. Nobody wanted the job. Yes, they offered it to Don DeLuise, John Binder. They were smart enough to stay away. So Ronnie Hallen, Garry Marshall's older sister, who was the associate producer then, told us the story, how she and Bobby Hoffman and Gary Mentier are working the phones, calling every agent in town saying, you got anybody we can stick in here? We got to shoot a show on Friday night. And an agent by the name of Alan Eisman represented a young comic who did a Martian as part of his act. They said, send him over. They read him. They immediately summoned Jerry Paris from the stage. Robin read for him, and without even a contract being offered to him as his agent or anything, Jerry took him by the arm, dragged him to the Happy Days stage, and 4 hours later, the writers and producers came down for a run-through. We were expecting the worst. What we saw was one of the most, it was so sensational, so unexpected, so beyond anything you'd ever seen. And Robin was phenomenal. He was on fire. And the Happy Days cast, you know, I think most shows would have taken this improvising dynamo and thrown him out the door. The Happy Days cast ceded the floor to him. Jerry Paris was at his best when with somebody like Robin, as he was with Penny and Cindy in A Date with Fonzie. Those challenges, those kind of talents brought out the best in him. And,
but just as Brian said, I'll never forget that run through, because usually if a guest star like adds one line, you know, you go nuts. But as Brian said, Robin was being Robin, and we were just stunned.
Everybody walked out saying spinoff, and sure enough, in the fall there was.
Yeah.
Well, there was never a pilot for Mork and Mindy.
No, no. What they did, Bob Brunner and Arthur Silver did a pretty middling pilot called Sister Terry, starring Pam Dauber as a non-uniformed nun, and so what they did was cut together on a split screen. What happens when this earthly girls meets this unearthly spaceman, Mork and Mindy, coming this fall to ABC. Pam Dauber never heard of the show, didn't know it had sold until she saw it in Variety. They'd never met until they went to Boulder to shoot the main titles.
Wow. My favorite Martian meets a studio audience.
Yeah. Yes.
What is this is off the top of my head? Was there a show called Out of the Blue or something like that?
Yes. That was
that a spinoff from you
Jimmy
guys?
Brogan.
Well, not technically. Not technically. So Bob Boyette and Tom Miller, they were in a personal and professional relationship, and they created Out of the Blue with Jimmy Brogan as an angel, living with a family of a high school teacher. Brogan introduced the character on an episode of Happy Days where, get this, Chachi had sold his soul to the devil. And he helps him to get it back. And then later that week, the show premiered with Robin Williams as Mork, guest starring on it. So it is not technically a spinoff, but it was also produced by Miller Boyette and Bill Bickley and Michael Warren, who were, longtime Happy Days people. And Bill produced the first 2 seasons of the show as well. But there's a number of shows with Blansky's Beauties was not a Happy Days spinoff. However, in the third, the Vegas Showgirls with Nancy Walker as the den mother, very unsuccessful show. So get this, she visited her cousin Howard Cunningham to set up the show during an anniversary show where we just showed clips and charged the network a full freight for a whole episode. And then it premiered with Scott Baio, with Pat Morita playing Arnold, originally with Pinky Tuscadero, Roz Kelly as Pinky Tuscadero, but she didn't get along any better with Nancy Walker than she did the Happy Days cast, and she was gone. Garry Marshall is the owner of the Oasis Casino. Linda Goodfriend, who would later marry Ron Howard on Happy Days, and Fred Fox Jr. What was your character?
I was Freddie the Bellhop.
You were on it. Oh,
Just 2 episodes where I was dating one of the ladies, which in real life never happened. But
you know, we have YouTube, and I'm not afraid to use it. We're gonna find it.
Hey, Sunshine, I got a 10-minute break.
Hi, Marvin.
You want to go for a ride on my dolly?
I think he likes me.
Did you say Garry Marshall was a casino owner in that? I wonder if that's because when he was a casino owner as an actor in Lost in America, he knocked it out of the park with him and Albert Brooks and the.
Well, and remember, then he played a network executive in Soap Dish, in Murphy Brown.
Same kind of guy, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
He played himself.
let me ask you. Back to Happy Days. So what was the atmosphere like? What was the feeling like when Ron left the show?
I was on Mork and Mindy at that time. So Fred.
Yeah, it was just came into work one day. Yeah, everything was going well, and then we got a call saying Ron wouldn't be back, and Donnie. It was the antithesis of the Robin Williams thing. We were just like, oh my God, what are we going to do? It really shook it up because I think Ron was very underrated as an actor in that show. Basically, they talk about Henry, everyone was fantastic, but when we got the news, it was really tough, and we had to come up with, new characters and who they're going to be and how they get there. But it was,
But it also reinvigorated the show because it pushed Aaron Moran and Scott Baio's characters, Joni and Chachi, into the foreground, and at the time they had started a relationship, and they were really good together. And Scott was really, really at a point where he was taking the work seriously. And was being very successful. And 2 major additions to the cast: Ted McGinley as Roger Phillips, Marion's nephew, and Kathy Silvers came along as the previously unseen character of Jenny Piccolo, and she very, very funny. This is a girl with a comedy axe. Her father Phil Silvers, so she inherited funny. And Ted, I think was a slower learner. He was really caught off guard by the fact that he was suddenly on a show months after he just decided, well, maybe I'll try acting.
I didn't know the timeline went like that. I have to agree with you about Kathy. Kathy's a friend, and she was great. And so I'm a Ted McKinley fan too. I always liked the guy, and Married with Children on Happy Days and all that stuff.
Well, Ted has accumulated over 500. You talk about credit. Ted has over 500. He's been a regular on Dynasty, on The Love Boat, on Married, on what was that Nathan Lane series, Charlie something.
Oh, right.
And then he's on Shrinking now.
Yeah, Shrinking, going into its 2nd season. He grabbed the brass ring again. Truly, a wonderful guy. Ted, he called it on-the-job learning. He told us a story. We weren't able to squeeze it into the book where he's in a scene and all of a sudden Jerry Paris is crawling on the floor, pulling him into the 2-shot by his leg.
That's funny. But you were talking about you mentioned how maybe Ron Howard was underrated. I thought he was amazing because the show is about wholesomeness, and then Henry Winkler's character becomes this huge sensation, and without Ron Howard's Richie, without his vulnerability and his honesty and his rawness and his purity, Fonzie doesn't work as well. The contrast, the total contrast between those characters and the fact that they still always have something in common and they just respected and loved each other as friends. Like that's what worked. Like so when Ron Howard left, I just felt like, and the show did very well after he left. But I mean, it just had to be heart stopping,
But no, I agree 100%. You're right.
But you want to know something interesting? After season 8, Happy Days was given an unheard of 2-year pickup. That's how successful the transition was for everybody. And the ratings were very, very strong, still a top 5 show. And it's a season, that those things are hard to maintain. But what Ron gave to the show, even after he left, was, he was definitely the captain of the ship, and the way that he ran the ship remained, that it was an ensemble and nobody came first. And people, that there was no one ever threw a script, nobody raised their voice. It was collegial, and it was family, and the best of family, and that was his lasting influence on the set itself. And the way they welcomed outsiders was they were so good to people who had 2 lines or came in for 3 days. They really were. And we did compiled a list of all the actresses who'd been on Happy Days early in their career. Amy Irving, Elvira, Diana Manoff, and Cheryl Ladd, and so many people. Then Linda Pearl, who would come back in season 10 to be Fonzie's regular girlfriend. Was in the first couple seasons. And they were good hosts as well. Happy Days was so unusual. When I left Happy Days, I was stunned by the difference. You knew such security on Happy Days. You didn't have network people trying to tear your show apart every week and trying to step in and impose their will. You didn't know if you would be picked up for the next season. All these insecurities and problems surfaced that we had no idea existed because we lived in this bubble. And by the time we got there, the hard work was done. Had been done. They had almost failed. They came back. They were on top of the world, and nobody was going to touch them for years. And it was just a feeling of security that I've never known.
Very rare.
Did anyone from your writing staff go from that environment that was so amazing to like a Roseanne or a because I've heard the stories,
everywhere you went was like you didn't know if you were going to be back after 13 episodes.
Yeah, because the contrast, it sounds like
it was a security that you shouldn't have in show business.
Yeah, that's a great line. It's a security that you shouldn't have in show business.
I do want to mention one thing with Scott Baio, that what I love the story in your book is that Garry Marshall gave him grief when he almost didn't play on the softball team.
Yeah. Well, and Anson said Garry read him for the first time, in the middle of a rainstorm, and he reads him for Potsy for the original pilot. And he's sitting and he's thinking, and then he says to him, "So, you good at softball?" and Anson, "Yeah, I'm good." And he goes, "How good?" And Anson goes, "Really good." And he goes, "Okay." And Anson said, obviously that was more important to him than the acting.
Yeah.
But now Fred and I we were the managers of the softball team. And as such, it allowed us the privilege of becoming much closer to the cast than, nominally writers and producers are, because there's always a wall separating. You weren't, one of the early lessons I learned on Happy Days was you don't go down and sit on the set.
Right.
Not allowed.
This wasn't just a softball team. I mean, from what you read, Happy Days took it very seriously.
Very seriously. Seriously. We played 16 games in major league parks as opening acts, several minor league parks, Portland. We did charity games in New Orleans, Albuquerque, all over LA. We played in parks. We played in the Orange Bowl. And I wasn't involved in the first tour. I was on Mork and Mindy. Went to Germany and played what, Fred? 5 games in 5 days against service teams.
yeah, these young kids were stunned that they thought, a bunch of Hollywood people, and we do most of the games. We had incredible players.
But Garry Marshall, he didn't really just seek like the Hollywood All-Stars or the publicity. I had played in a league on a weekend. It was either Saturday or Sunday over at North Hollywood Park.
The entertainment league.
The entertainment league, yeah. But it was like, it wasn't a thing like Dodger Stadium with all the, it was just weekend softball. He just loved to play softball. And obviously
he played into his 80s. Fred still plays on the team that was Gary's. And Fred I'll say it again. He just made the All-Star team for the 6th year in a row at 77. So
nice.
Very lucky.
But we were a great baseball team, and the chemistry that existed in the fraternalism of the set was translated to the show. And the most amazing thing was Henry Winkler had never owned a baseball glove till he was 28, and Ron Howard gave him one in a pitching lesson
because
so he could be part of it.
He could sell you that he can ride a motorcycle, he can play baseball, he can be cool, he can kick your ass. And but you meet him and he's the softest,
very sweet. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
It's such a pleasure to meet you. It's so amazing. What are the plans for the big anyversary, the 50-year? What's anything going on?
We're very happy to announce it on December 13th. There will be a celebration of 50 years of Happy Days at the Garry Marshall Theater in Toluca Lake. And we'll be showing the original pilot, and Fred and I will be part of a panel with William S. Bickley, the original producer, and Lowell Gans, the supervising producer of seasons 7, 8, 9, and the producer of season 3. And hopefully Ronnie Hallen, Gary's older sister and the associate producer, and it'll be moderated by Scott Marshall, Gary's son. And we'll be signing books there and stuff. So we're really looking forward to that. And we'll be out and about all over the country. We're going to Milwaukee.
Nice. I see Anson. I've known Anson since before Happy Days. And so
wait, are you from Burbank?
No, I didn't live in Burbank, but I'm from the San Fernando Valley. What's the difference? He used to drive me around on auditions. My mom would pay him
really?
My mom never drove. Yeah.
Oh,
and he drove me around for a lot. And he was like kind of an older brother figure to me and my guardian on set and stuff like that. And
I never knew that.
Yeah. And he and I just got together not too long ago, had a great conversation about Happy Days, and just his heart is all about everybody he worked with. He's a good guy too.
Very
talented. Great director.
That's very interesting. So many people came out of Happy Days and became really good directors. I mean, even like the second AD became a big music video guy. Rich Carell, our associate producer, has directed 700 episodes of television, some long form stuff. Gary, me, virtually everybody came out and we did compile a huge list of all the shows and the movies that came from Happy Days personnel, and it's really kind of imposing. And that wasn't even leaning too hard into Ron or Gary.
Robin Williams. I have a feeling, I think we all have a feeling that some way or another fame was going to find Robin Williams, because he was undeniable. But like, what a launch. And how many people on the planet? I mean, I love John Byner, but no one else I think could have done what he did in 4 hours with a run through and all that.
No. And what people don't know about Mork and Mindy was Garry Marshall, the first 8 episodes, he was all over it. Like, you talk about, he wasn't there on the beginning of Happy Days, the beginning of Mork and Mindy. He shaped that show. All of those first early episodes where he falls in love with a mannequin, where he brings, everybody's so upset about somebody dying, he brings them back to life. The things that made that show what it became, and another instant #1 show really came from his direct involvement. And I think once he stepped away, it was never the same. And trust me, and I ran the show for a while.
No, you did a great job.
It was tough, but it was also a phenomenon. And almost as well merchandised as
Yeah.
Happy.
Yeah.
When you look at the triumvirate of Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy, that was the most successful television property of the 20th century.
Well,
Financially.
look at Happy Days early on. You got, it's basically the Saturday Evening Post or whatever, or or
Norman Rockwell. Yes. Yes.
you go
very
from
much
Norman
so.
Rockwell to an alien, and you make it work. Like, you go from real world to Mork and Mindy, and it still worked. You got,
Right.
Yeah.
High concept. There's always been high concept in television.
Yeah.
My favorite Martian is a great. I Dream of Jeannie, Gilligan's Island, the Beverly Hills. These were all.
Yeah.
We forget that there really was an era where the most outrageous, the Addams Family, the Munsters. How did the Munsters ever get on CBS? You tell me.
So looking at Happy Days, it's 50 years now, like you said, that's the book. So it's still popular, it's still revered. So what do you both attribute its longevity to?
Personally, I think it really stems from the warmth that was radiated by the cast. Marion Ross, one of the most sensational, warm, lovely human beings. Donnie, Anson, Aaron, Tom, Scott, Ted, Kath, Ron, Henry, Al Molinaro, Pat Morita. I mean, just a collection of these wonderful, kind, open people. And, Barbara Billingsley used to say that you can't hide who you are on television. And I believe that. And I think that really came through. And the fact that so many people grew up on it, and then another generation grew up on it when it was featured on Nickelodeon and Nick at Night.
And also, I think it was a family they would have loved to be a part of.
Yes, that's so true. And it was always made by loving hands, and it was there for so long. I mean, other than the Big Bang Theory, I can't remember.
Right.
At MASH, I can't. You name how many shows went 11 seasons. There's a handful.
And I when you mentioned Marion Ross, like, how underrated, and she was so fantastic. I mean, she was.
Yes, the sweetest woman. We've just spent some time with her, and she's so kind and so warm. God, I just gush when I'm around her. We have such a good time with her, and always have.
She asked me to Musso Frank's 100th anniversary.
Oh yeah.
We sat at a table with Fred Willard and her son. The only reason I mentioned it, so many people came up to her. Thank goodness. She's just the sweetest.
Yeah, and she's 96 now.
Yeah. And I think I used the wrong word. I hate when I say underrated because it implies that someone's saying that she's not great. It's
five Emmy nominations in 4 different categories.
Right. But yeah, I mean, and she was sometimes a straight man. She was sometimes the smartest person in the room. She could be anything you write for her. And she was just fantastic.
Wonderful people.
Yeah.
I always thank my lucky stars that I fell in with this group who promoted kindness, who were good to each other, good to everyone involved, who set an example of professionalism and competence that you take with you and spread in a system that was handed down from the Sid Caesar show through Carl Reiner to Garry Marshall to all of us who spread it, throughout the industry. And it was so family oriented. I mean, so many of us had kids at the same time and were involved in raising them, and the baseball team and the trips. There was a cohesion that I've never felt anything else in the industry, and we miss it. And that's why it was so great for us to be working on Happy Days again.
Dream come true.
What are you both working on next?
Brian has a great project. Oh yeah.
No, I'm doing a book on Archie collectibles.
Oh, very cool.
Very different. But this was you know, I mean, I don't think I'll ever do another book on another show because I don't feel the same affinity for anything else. Even the things I've worked on, it's so primal in everything that I am and became. And I know Fred feels the same way, and he was lucky enough to work with so many the Happy Days people for 8 years on Family Matters, you know, which was a whole other wonderful family. I told him he should do the Family Matters. See, everybody else has done a book already. Happy Days, they wouldn't let anybody do a book before.
Well, I'll say this right now, because Brian, you know, you've been on before. You're welcome on again. We love talking to you, Fred. We would love to have you on too, because besides Family Matters, we have to discuss It's Your Move.
Wow. I'm so proud of you for knowing that show.
Is that Jason Bateman? Is that
right?
Yes, Jason Bateman. And,
David Garrison.
Yes, it was a Ron Levitt and Michael. Was Moyer involved with that, Fred?
Yeah.
It was a hysterical show that never got its due.
We'll have to get into that. We'll have to have you back and get into that.
Yes,
well, thank you. I'd love to. Thanks so much for having us.
All right, gentlemen. Well, listen, this has been fantastic. Brian, if I dig up, I have an old Jughead hat.
The red one?
I think it was actually denim, but it had it was Jughead.
Yeah, that's called a whoopee cap.
A whoopee
Very
cap.
Popular in the late 30s.
Okay. But my mom used to call it the Jughead hat. I remember. Yeah. And Archie had a character named Moose, and everyone called me Moose. But
that's right.
Got me a Jughead hat. Anyway, this has been fantastic, gentlemen. Jonathan, want to bring us on home?
Well, again, this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Moosie Drier. And again, a very special thanks to Brian Levant and Fred Fox Jr. The book is out early November, so make sure to get it because it's great. And please like, comment, and subscribe. Guys, thank you again.
Thank you. A lot of fun.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast. Listening to this podcast just makes you really cool.